All right, it is 4 o'clock, and we do have a quorum.
Recording in progress.
So welcome to the August 19th meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments Board. This time, we're holding this meeting in accordance with Executive Order N2920. The Humboldt County Association of Governments meetings will be held virtually until further notice. There is a ribbon across the screen for those who wish to call in for public comment. At this time, we'll ask for a roll call.
Supervisor Bass?
Here.
Mayor Jones?
Here.
Mayor Seaman?
Here.
Mayor Heinley? Council Member Atkins Salazar?
Here.
Council Member Johnson?
Here.
Council Member West?
Here.
Council Member Aurora?
Here.
Miss Allstrand?
Here.
And Chair Johnson.
Here.
Thank you.
And thank you. At this time, we will adjourn as the HCOG board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And our first order of business this evening or afternoon is a presentation, couple of presentations by Caltrans. First one on the 101 Eureka Arcata corridor.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Pimentel. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Cool. All right. Good to see all of you again. Having me. So I wanted to give you guys a brief update on a couple items regarding our Indianola Undercrossing project, which is the bids had opened on that project on July 22nd. So there were three bidders on the project. Unfortunately, all three bids did come in above the engineer's estimate. And all this information is actually public online. The bids range anywhere between 50 million up to about 59 million. The engineer's estimate was just slightly under 45 million. The other element of what's going on with the project is that the three bidders all have filed bidder protests on this project. So our construction staff are still currently evaluating and analyzing the bids to try and determine the best, I guess, action and next steps forward. Our two options would be to award and recommend award to one of the bidders, or we're also reviewing and strongly considering repackaging and re-advertising the project. And for kind of legality and legal reasons, since formal decisions haven't been made and filed and approved on one direction or another, I'm not able to really speak to too much more detail than that at this point, but just want to communicate that finding a direction forward on this will be done very soon, and it is a priority for the district, and all of our management is engaged in this all the way up to our headquarters staff. We've been engaging our attorneys in Sacramento, that our legal branch of Caltrans, to review and help the district determine the best action forward. I have been keeping Beth in the loop continually as things have been unfolding. And so I expect to know more likely before the next board meeting. And so as I'll be giving those updates to Beth, and Beth has even been a part of some of our discussions and meetings, I'll be giving those updates to her, and I'm sure she can share information with the board. But I do plan on coming back to the board next month to give you guys a full update as well. So unfortunately, it's a little complicated, but we're just trying to be careful and make sure that we're making the right decision. And I am, as I said, looping Beth into that the way we see it. It's not necessarily a unilateral Caltrans decision. It is HCOG is our partners and a large funding component of the project. So I'm keeping her in the loop, but we are getting our advice and direction both from our construction management and our legal team on the protest, especially because we want to be sure that we don't put ourselves in a bind moving forward. So anyway, the next item I wanted to update, but I'll pause for a moment to allow any questions, is on the mitigation. But before I move on to that, I'll allow any questions that the board may have.
Does anyone have any questions for Jeff about this?
Yes, Mike, this is Gordon Johnson. And Jeff, can you tell us the nature of the 3 various bid protests that were received accompanying the bids?
I'm probably going to punt to that the protests they should be public online, and what I can do is find that link and send that to Beth, and Beth could distribute that to the board. I just don't want to speak to those in a public forum, I guess, that could misconstrue, because there's just they're rather lengthy and have a lot of detail to them. So I think it would probably be better served to direct you guys to where those are located. And then if you guys have further questions, either to myself or I can engage any other staff, such as from our construction branch, that might be better versed to answer some of those questions and break down the bidder protests.
And my second question would be, what did the bidders see differently than the estimators saw?
So a large part of most of the increased costs that we saw from the engineer's estimate was in the specialty work with the column supported embankment, which was the construction method we had to shift to due to the soft soils out there, and the also length of time and risk to failure of the embankments should we had attempted to construct them just with a conventional embankment approach with allowing settlement and various lifts with the embankment. So that's where we saw the biggest, I guess, discrepancy between what the estimate was. We did, when we prepared our engineer's estimate, there was quite a wide range of costs on that work. And so, we've seen some very interesting economic forces, in the past year and a half or so in light of the pandemic and a lot of other things going on. And so whether it's those forces playing on the bids coming in, I can't really, speak for that for certain, but that's where we saw most of the differences. And so anyway, we'll be discussing all of that as well and considering things as we look to potentially repackage and re-advertise the project or not and recommend award, but that's what we're evaluating at this time.
Well, we're eager to hear next month what Caltrans decides as far as award. Thank you.
Yeah, and I expect we'll have a decision well before that, and I will definitely be keeping Beth in the loop as I have been. So I expect that, and I'm not sure if you guys have a communication line, in between board meetings where you guys communicate just on topics in between, but if you guys have that communication line, then there's definitely going to be that opportunity because I'll be giving her that information in real time.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions.
Any other questions before we move on? I don't hear anything. So
okay, well, I'll move on to the mitigation. So on the mitigation, mitigating for not only NBL undercrossing project, also 3 of the Caltrans zone shop projects, and also mitigating for City of Arcata's Bay Trail North that is completed, and Humboldt County's Bay Trail South, which is in its final design stages and going to be coming online here for construction in the not too distant future. So we had our first phase of the mitigation, which was the offsite mitigation at our Samoa parcels. Amazingly, those bids came in almost half of the engineer's estimate. And there was a significant savings, I believe, that went back to the RIP shares. And I have those totals here, and I think I maybe spoke to these previously. But with those savings, I believe there was a credit of about 1.028 million went back to RIP shares due to the lower bids that we received on that work. So that work commenced. I believe there's still planting that has to take place. That project will go on for a number of years with regards to the long-term monitoring and maintenance, but most of the construction itself in that contract, those monies were dedicated to, has been completed. And actually over last winter, we saw a lot of success with a lot of habitat already establishing itself. And so that what we saw out there was real positive and great to see from an ecological improvement perspective. The second phase of the mitigation project is the Spartina Eradication, the invasive Spartina species, grass species at Tuluwat Island. And that was being done through an existing environmental document that the Harbor District has in the Humboldt Bay area to eradicate Spartina. And so our plan has been to initiate a co-op or execute a co-op with the Harbor District to put out a contract request for proposal for bids on doing the actual work. So that was completed. We received one bid from RCAA. Unfortunately, on that work, the bids came in about double what the amount of funds that were allocated. And so we were expecting the bids to come in around, I think, just under 4 million. The bids came in over 6 million. We met with the RCAA, we met with the Harbor District because our estimates were based on a lot of logic from experts that had done Spartina work in the region. And so they weren't, while we don't have a lot of experience doing Spartina eradication work to where we can base our estimates like we base the unit cost of asphalt or concrete, we don't see a lot of variations in those prices because we have a lot of data on this. We didn't, but we did sync up with people that done the work to try to get good estimates on the amount of time, labor, hours, materials that would be needed to do the work. So what I saw on that and the rest of our team saw is that we wanted to meet with them to make sure that the assumptions they were making in their bids and the plan to do the work was correct because we saw a big disconnect. So we did find some discrepancies, and in meeting with them, we were actually able to reduce the cost by about $750,000, about $750,000. And Beth was actually a part of those meetings. So that was real positive. Still, nonetheless, the cost is much higher than what we had allocated. But on a positive note, we had a substantial savings on the development of the mitigation. So we had between our P&ED zero, what we call our zero phase, our project approval environmental document phase, and our design phase, we had a total of just over $3 million allocated to do that work. And we actually completed all of the work within just over $800,000. So with those savings here, and I sent this to Beth, see what the savings were. Pull that up here really quick. So the savings there were a total of $1.147 million. So on the capital side with the low bids for the Samoa wetland creation work, we saw a credit of $1.028 million back to RIP. And the project development costs that we saved on the mitigation brought back $1.147 million back to RIP. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's correct. So when you add those together, the total was $2.175 million. So between the two savings, 2.175 million went back to RIP shares. I did some rough calculations on the Spartina increase that we have. And thankfully, the split between the ITIP, which is funding a large portion of both projects, the Indianola project and the mitigation, the ITIP is kicking in 85%. RIP is kicking in only 15%. And based on my calculations, and these still need to be vetted by headquarters, but I'm calculating about $225,000 would be the impact to RIP in order to be able to award the contract to RCAA to complete the work. The ITIP would have to kick in an additional 1.26 million roughly. So considering the savings of, were they just under 2.2 million, we're looking at needing a little over, probably between 200,000 to 300,000 would be safe to assume. Like I said, headquarters does their calculations, but this is just based on what I'm seeing. Obviously, on the Indianola project, that's unknown at this time. If we do move to repackage and re-advertise, obviously there is the chance that bids could come within the engineer's estimate, within the allocated amount. But we did see that the bids had already come in above. But even then, even to the second bidder, that was the second low bid, which was at 57 million on Indianola. I believe the impact to RIP was going to be about 1.1 million. So still overall, kind of what I'm seeing in a worst case scenario, based on the bids we had gotten, which we're not necessarily awarding, we're uncertain at this time, and what we need additional in the mitigation, we'd still be under the credit that was given to the RIP on the mitigation. So I just kind of wanted to put that in perspective. But obviously the goal is to save as much as we can. And you know, that was a big reason why Beth and I went back to RCA and the Harbor District to try to coordinate assumptions and see if there were any savings. And thankfully there was $750,000 savings there. So now my understanding on the additional, and these are right-of-way funds for the mitigation, is that we do not need CTC approval to get the additional funds. On right-of-way funds, if the total funds being expended are under $10 million, the debit to ITIP and RIP happens at the completion of the project. So we do not need to go to the CTC for the additional funds. They do the accounting afterwards. But since there would be an impact to the RIP shares, I've been communicating with Beth. There would obviously need to be an approval by the HCOG board for us to move forward and award that contract. My understanding in talking with Beth in the past few days is that we wouldn't be able to vote on that total today. I don't even have a solid total on that today, but I expect by the next board meeting, I would have what that total would be. And I'm hoping that we could make that an action item to vote on that so that we could proceed with awarding that contract. And at that time, and well in advance of that time for the agenda, I'll work with our headquarters staff to solidify what that total amount that we'd be voting on. So anyway, I feel like that was a lot of information. Hope it wasn't too much or too detailed, but I'll open it up for questions if anyone has any on that.
Any questions for Jeff on the mitigation? Doesn't sound like there's any right now. Thank you for the detail work in the report and keeping us updated with all that.
Yeah, my pleasure. And as I said, I'll be keeping Beth updated real time and plan to come back and see you guys in a month as well.
All right. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I could just make a comment, I really do appreciate Jeff's effort to keep me informed. We're getting updates, daily, sometimes multiple times a day, and it's been really helpful for me to get up to speed on the project. I also just wanted to mention that he did come and make a presentation to the TAC, and because it's so rapidly evolving, even the information we had then is a little bit more details today. So we'll also keep the TAC informed and work through this as part of our tip as well. So we are keeping everybody in the loop as best as possible.
All right. Thank you. And thank you again, Jeff. And
All right. Thanks, everyone.
okay. And at this time, we have another report on the 101-299 interchange.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm not sure how to change my name on Zoom. So this is Pao Yang. I'm the project manager for that project that you mentioned, Mike. So just to give a little bit of background on this project, it's in construction right now since June. The plan was to do utilities completely before we actually start construction, meaning we take care of all the utility stuff. So that did happen. We're on schedule, on time. They've got the right-of-way fence built. They're only working on the Caltrans side right now. So we are within Caltrans property as far as work is concerned. They have done the base work, which is the underlayment portion of the road. They've done the culvert work. They've done the ditch work to make the drainage better. This is a safety project. They have about 42 working days left, which is roughly about 2 months left. So to touch a little bit on the right-of-way concerns, Caltrans did follow proper procedures. We paid all the property owners involved properly. Everything's done according to our normal procedures. There is no condemnation. So everything is going according to plan, based on schedule, based on right-of-way compensation. Everything's just right on track. If there are any questions, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions for Powell? Yes, Mayor Jones.
Yeah, hi. Since this interchange affects Blue Lake quite a bit because we have a lot of commuters using it to get to Arcata and Eureka and other places, is Caltrans going to do some kind of assessment on what the speed limit should be on this new interchange? Because right now, I think it was 35, but are you going to be doing some assessment on what the speed limit should be on that interchange?
This project specifically involves the ramp on the northbound 101 to eastbound 299. Are you referring to the overall interchange, meaning all the ramps?
No, just this one. Are
Oh,
you going to change the miles per hour?
Okay. Yeah, it was a safety project. I'm a little bit late to the project, meaning I got to the project after the design phase. But typically what happens with Caltrans is, especially for a safety project, they try to find out why we have the safety issue, and then they try to remedy that. So if it's maybe a speed limit concern, then they would look at that. If it's something else, maybe sometimes weaving or like traffic weaving, or maybe too much traffic, they would have looked at that. So because it has gone through all of our normal procedures for safety evaluations, then I'm going to say that has been done. I'm not aware of anything that has not been done. Some areas do not necessarily require a speed change. So on this one, if you want the specific records, I can look for that and get back to you. But because it is a safety project and it has gone through our normal process for safety projects, typically we go through what we call is a safety review, and especially for safety projects. So it has passed through that. So if you need further details, I can send that to you. But that's our normal procedure, and I can't see us not going through our normal procedures, especially for a safety project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Thank you for the update and your diligence in that and answering the questions we did have. It's very much appreciated, and we look forward to seeing that safety project completed and in next report. So thank you very much. At this time, our next item is public participation for items not on the agenda today. And do we have any public comment waiting?
I do not on this item.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Moving on to approval of the meeting record. Has everybody had a chance to look over the minutes from the June meeting?
I have Chairperson, and Adeline Jones, Mayor of Blue Lake, moves to approve the June 17th, 2021 meeting record.
And Supervisor Bass will second that.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second, and we get a roll call vote.
Supervisor Bass?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Mayor Seaman?
Aye.
Council Member Atkins Salazar?
I wasn't at that meeting, so I'm going to abstain. Thank you.
Council Member Gordon Johnson?
Yes.
Council Member West?
Yes.
Council Member Aroro?
Aye.
And Miss Tatiana Alstrand?
I also wasn't at that meeting, so I will abstain. Thank you.
And Chair Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We come now to the consent calendar with 6 items. Has everyone had a chance to look at that? And is there anyone that would like to pull anything? Seeing none, we'll entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar. Mayor Seaman.
Second by Gordon Johnson.
Okay, again, we have a motion and a second. We have a roll call.
Supervisor Bass?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Mayor Seaman?
Aye.
Council Member Atkins Salazar?
Aye.
Council Member Gordon Johnson?
Yes.
Council Member West?
Yes.
Council Member Aroro?
Aye.
Ms. Tatiana Alstrand?
Yes.
And Chair Johnson?
Yes,
Thank you. Motion passes.
and thank you. At this time, we come to the PAC action items. First one being the coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations. And do we have a staff report?
Yes, I'll be giving the staff report. So this was, as you mentioned, coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriation dollars that came to HCOG for distribution. And there's 2 pots of money related to this funding. One is following basically the state's STGB formula, which is like a block grant formula. And so through that portion of the funding, HCOG received $649,621 for distribution between our member entities and our region. And then there was another pot of funding or formula distribution that came through the state STIP formula. And with that, we received, let's see, on that portion, we've got, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I've got my numbers right here. $1.3 million approximately for that portion of the formula. And that includes PPM money coming to HCOG. So the TAC reviewed these funding sources, and with the STIP funding, what they recommend is really just rolling it into our 2022 STIP process and the RTIP that we're currently working on. So that money will roll in and be available basically through a call for projects, and the TAC will be making recommendations on how to distribute that, and the HCOG board would make a future decision on how to use that portion of the funds. And that was really unanimous at the TAC. The part that interested the TAC more, or we had much more discussion on, was the STGB. Was the one that followed the STGB formula, and that there's so many acronyms, so I'm sorry for stumbling a little bit. But what the TAC recommended on that one, we had a lot of discussion on that. We actually went to 3 TAC meetings. The first to ask what we should do, and then kind of presenting alternative formulas from there. And so they did recommend following the HCOG RSTP formula, which is the Surface Transportation Program, the money coming from the state for that. And that formula has been set for HCOG for many, many years, and it has distributions to all of the member entities and tribal governments. And so ultimately they did want to follow that formula. There was one exception to that, and that was the $33,000 they wanted to allocate to the pavement management program. And this, if you'll remember, those bids came in a little bit high. And so we were going to go back and negotiate and try to look at what services we could maybe do without or bring down. And the TAC really felt strongly that they wanted all the bells and whistles, and they didn't want anything taken off of what was proposed for the winning bidder. So their recommendation was to make up for that difference by using this money, and then as you'll see in the resolution and in the staff report, divvy it up otherwise following the RSTP formula. So with that, I will say it was not a unanimous vote at the TAC. There were 2 smaller entities, Blue Lake and Trinidad, that voiced concerns about this distribution, and ultimately voted no on this distribution because it really, as you'll see, like for example, Trinidad ends up with $897. So difficult for the smaller entities, but ultimately we did have a vote to follow the RSTP formula, and I think that's because it's been vetted so often, and they just kind of wanted to stick with that. So I just wanted to make it clear that was kind of how it all fleshed out. But we did have a prevailing vote on that to follow this formula. So your resolution that your board is considering, or the PAC is considering, is that breakdown that's presented, as well as putting the STIP money into the mid-cycle, or the mid-cycle STIP money into our 2022 round. So I'll be happy to take any questions on this.
Do you have any questions for Executive Director Burke? Is there any public comment?
Mayor Jones has a question.
Oh, I didn't see her. I'm sorry. Yes, Mayor Jones.
Yeah, I was curious to know what tribal governments are we talking about here? Would you break that down for me?
Yeah, they're all the same tribal governments that participate in our TAC. So that I can kind of go off the top of my head here, or grab my list. That would be Blue Lake Rancheria, Karuk Tribe, Trinidad Rancheria. Who am I forgetting? Bear River Band, Yurok. I think I got all 5 there. Am I missing anybody? Forgive me if I am. But all the same tribes that do participate in our TAC, and that money essentially flows through the county. So they would need to work together to identify the projects, and then work with County Public Works to essentially receive the funding for whatever projects they plug in.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
HOOPA, sorry, I failed to mention HOOPA.
Okay, were there any public comment? I don't believe so.
like a motion?
Yes.
Okay. I move staff recommendation, including resolution 20-21-22 and all the aforementioned language.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that. Stacy from Arcata.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And I always lose track.
Roll
If we
call
have a
vote.
roll call.
Supervisor Bass,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember West,
Yes.
Councilmember Aurora,
Yes.
Ms. Tatiana Alstrand,
Yes.
and Chair Johnson.
Yes,
Thank you. Motion passes.
thank you. Moving along now, we come to the Regional Transportation Plan update with the administrative draft for the tribal transportation element. And do we have a staff report and person reporting?
Yes, I'll give the staff report on this one. So HCOG has included the tribal transportation element in the RTP since 2008. And as far as we know, we were the first regional transportation planning agency to include this type of element. Since then, I think Lake and Mendocino counties have followed our lead. So I think it's pretty neat that HCOG has been a trailblazer in this type of element. So new this year, though, to the tribal transportation element are goals and policies. They weren't in there before. And so we wanted to make the element consistent with the other elements and have goals and policies related to this topic. So the proposed policies, I want to go over those. The first is supporting the mission of the North Coast Tribal Transportation Commission and the formation of a joint powers authority for the purposes of applying for a seat on the HCOG board. There was a resolution included with your packet. The criteria for applying for a seat on the HCOG board was developed some time ago. So this would just be advocating for support of the Joint Powers Authority that would allow for them to apply. And then the other piece of that is the North Coast Tribal Transportation Commission supporting their mission. And that is really compatible with the goal that's proposed currently in this element, which is that tribal communities have safe, efficient mobility options. They benefit from equitable access to transportation resources and have strong interjurisdictional partnerships for advocating and solving transportation issues for tribal communities. So that would be the first policy. And also the second policy is supporting legislation that would remove the limited waiver of sovereign immunity from the Streets and Highways Code and expand eligible project types that Caltrans can contract directly with tribes on. So there's some history to this one. And currently the Streets and Highway Code includes certain restrictions limiting when Caltrans can contract with tribes and requiring this limited waiver of sovereign immunity when it is allowable. And so the consequences of this are that it's just proven to be a barrier in sort of the tribes receiving money once they're awarded projects. It takes a lot of extra time. And there's kind of two aspects to that. One is on a fundamental level, really any request to waive sovereign immunity, it erodes tribal sovereignty. And given the history of, sort of tribal sovereignty being compromised, I think that it's understandable why tribes are weary to waive any amount of their sovereignty. So I think that's some of the historical level. On a practical level, what it means is that Caltrans often has to work with intermediaries such as Federal Highways or the BIA in order to award contracts to the tribe, and it can cause a lot of delays. So this is happening statewide, and in fact, the CTC has the California Transportation Commission has a legislative priority to a recommendation to also change this language. But locally, one example would be in Hoopa. There was a Safe Routes to School project awarded in 2015. And due to all of these complications, they are still waiting for that project to be funded and be able to work on it. So it creates a lot of extra delays. And, I think that, this is really just kind of a policy that staff has recommended, including in order to make sure that our tribal partners have quicker access to the money that's been awarded to them and not have to compromise our sovereignty in the process. So that's the purpose for including that one. And the third policy is that HCOG would support Caltrans initiatives to review all the named assets located on the state transportation system and propose assets to be renamed that have any correlation to anything discriminatory. So that's something that Caltrans has an initiative for, and we would want to express support for that. Our staff's proposing we express support for that. And all of these policies really fit nicely into the equity intentions that we're expressing in the Renewing Communities chapter, which is the next item on the agenda. So the second part of the tribal transportation element is really the tribal government summaries, and these have been in the elements since the beginning of the elements inclusion in the RTP. So I want to just quote one piece of that chapter, which is from the California Transportation Plan, and that is that as sovereign nations, Native American tribal governments have the authority to make and approve transportation plans to further their unique community goals. So we include the tribal transportation element partly to highlight the transportation projects that are important to the individual tribal governments within Humboldt County. And the tribes, they give us the project lists and the project narratives that are important to them and that have been included in their own individual tribal transportation plans. So I will say that one particular project, the Trinidad Rancheria's 101 Trinidad Area Access Improvement Project, has generated a lot of public comment. We get a lot of calls about this project. We had people coming to speak at the TAC, and I think we have public commenters today as well, specific to that project. And I just want to frame this a little bit about what the role of the tribal transportation element is in relation to the specific projects. And again, it's really to highlight what the tribes have told us is important to them. So the Trinidad Rancheria did receive funding actually through HCOG's 2018 RTIP for the environmental and planning stages of this project, and partly due to contracting issues that we just mentioned in terms of when they can contract with Caltrans and waiving sovereign immunity. There's been delays in them receiving the money, so they just in fact received the money that was programmed for them in 2018. And so where they're at right now is there's an RFP out to hire a consultant to help them through this early planning phase. And once the consultant is selected, the Rancheria has committed to making a presentation to the HCOG board about the project, including what the avenues are for public participation as the project moves forward, the CEQA process, and really the project timeline. So once they have their consultant on board and they can get that together, that they're willing to come to the HCOG board and present that information. So again, I just want to say that the purpose of including this project in the tribal transportation element is to highlight that it is a priority project for the tribe, but it's really not the spot where we would get into the finer details of that project and how it's going to proceed. With that, I would close my presentation and be happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions for our executive director? And this time I'm checking to see if, and I see no hands. Do we have any public comment?
We do. So the first caller I have, Elaine, if you're on the line.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'll go. Thank you for taking our question and comments. And when you speak to Jeff next, tell him nice drum kid. Should I keep going? Okay. My name is Glenn Pollock. I live with my wife, Therese Pollock, and our daughter, Sage. And we live on 736 Southwest Haven Drive. And before I get into our concerns, I just want to apologize for the hundreds of years of atrocities to the tribal communities across this nation. I totally understand, especially in 1957 when the road was split, that to take back their land, no doubt about it. So, yeah, it's a tough position everyone's in. So for our concern, we live literally Southwest Haven Drive off of 6th Avenue. Our road is a foot from our front fence, and our neighbors live in the same situation. And I went through we drove West Haven. There's about 45 properties we just roughly counted of homeowners. This is our home, so we are concerned of a reclaim there. And if there is a reclaim, how much time do we have? And will we get fair market price? And also, sorry, just a few things. I wrote some notes. And what I was looking at the document from 12/14/2017. And one of my questions is there's an updated document to that online? Because we didn't see like the colored graphs and schematics of where West Haven would be widened. Because of course that would pretty much get us out of our property. And again, I understand, trust is the tribe, and this is good for economic stimulus. So, if it does come to widening West Haven, I can only say I hope we get fair market value. And how much time will you give us? I mean, it's more than the natives got, of course. And but this is our home, our family with COVID, so and we love it here. So, how does the road widening work? And I'll be quiet. Thank you. And again, I understand.
I would defer to Executive Director Burks, but as far as I know, there is no plan as of yet. There's no design. It's a concept.
Market value and how much time.
Sarah Johnson, that's correct, and I do want to be a little careful just because the agenda item is the broader tribal transportation element as opposed to like this individual project with all the details of where we're at with the design. I'm not familiar, I'm not sure which document this 12/14/2017. There are project study reports that have been approved by Caltrans, but again, those are, like you're saying, those are concept reports that are produced. So I don't think again. The consultant will come when we have a more formal project to really discuss. I'm not sure we're going to have the details to be able to respond to these kinds of questions tonight.
I want a better place to sit.
Another speaker, and that would be Elaine Weinref.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, board members and staff. My name is Elaine Weinreb, and I've lived in West Haven for 34 years. I'm also a retired transportation planner and environmental planner from Caltrans. I have volunteered to be the co-chair of the Friends of West Haven, a group of residents who are deeply concerned about the proposed interchange and its effects upon our community. So I am talking about the Trinidad Area Access Improvement Project, which is part of the Tribal Transportation Elements, Item 8B. Residents of West Haven were shocked to learn that nearly all of the proposed transportation solutions described in this project study report involved the widening the entirety of West Haven Drive to Caltrans standards as an adjunct to a proposed interchange on 101. West Haven Drive is about 3 miles long, has about 150 parcels which front directly onto it, and is highly rural in nature. The road is winding and tree-lined. This widening would take away people's front yards, parking areas, and in some cases, county-approved septic systems. It would also impact less directly about 350 households whose secondary roads access West Haven Drive. People seldom use this road as a throughway because the freeway is less than a half mile away and much easier to drive on. Although this proposed road widening affects West Haven residents directly, we were never notified of this proposed action at any time. We are not part of the city of Trinidad. We do not vote in the city, and its public officials have shown little interest in residents outside its city limits. We were not invited to the design fair that the tribe says served as its public notification, nor were we informed about the publication of the project study report. It was even more disturbing to learn that tribal officials said that they knew nothing about this widening, even though it appeared prominently in the document with the tribal seal upon it. Caltrans officials have told us to talk to the tribe, so they so far have been of little help. This makes the widening of West Haven Drive a runaway train. Nobody knows who got into the engine and tinkered with the gears, but it is now racing down the tracks with nobody in control, threatening to wreak havoc. I am also curious as to why the tribe considers a document that is over 10 years old to serve as adequate public notification to anybody. That is about a half a generation in terms of human existence. In summary, West Haven residents need to be included in the planning process, particularly in the scoping session of the environmental impact statement, which is supposed to be written this year. We hope that the tribe and Caltrans can work with the West Haven community to solve these problems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker that we have is Jeff Prost.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Jeff Proust, Proust. I'm here today to urge you to include Friends of West Haven as an official stakeholder in general transportation planning for the West Haven community, including the project approval and environmental document phase of the Rancheria's transportation plan. I know this community well, having lived here for 40 years and having served as teacher, principal, and superintendent of Trinidad Union School District. 6 alternatives in the 2017 Trinidad Access Project PSR involve a widening of West Haven Drive. These alternatives concern not just those with property on West Haven Drive, but all local families who use the road for travel, exercise, or recreational riding and walking. Here is a summary of our concerns. First, public response clearly indicates that the community does not support the widening of West Haven Drive, but we have no current representation in planning. Second, because many local homes began as logging cabins prior to the establishment of modern road right-of-ways, home setbacks from West Haven Drive are often very close to the road. Widening would bring about loss of property square footage for many homeowners. Third, diminished street setbacks would result in compromised child safety, increased noise level, removal of structures, displacement of county-approved septic systems, and driveways so shortened they would no longer be able to hold a car. 4, widening would result in significant loss of property value for many local residents. It is very unlikely that financial reimbursement from eminent domain would come even close to the actual loss in property value. 5, road widening would likely create more demand for new construction, radically changing the rural aspect of this community. 6, a wider road would inevitably result in higher speed travel with increased dangers and potentially tragic consequences. 7, additional traffic would include those impaired by alcohol consumption at the casino, endangering local walkers, joggers, bicyclists, and children. Day and night casino drinkers may consider West Haven Drive to be the preferred route since it is less often patrolled than Highway 101. And 8, a widened road will result in accidents and fatalities due to increased traffic volume, higher speed travel, and occurrences of driving under the influence. This specifically endangers children, whether playing, walking, or riding bikes and skateboards. Once again, please support Friends of West Haven as an official stakeholder in governmental processes dealing with transportation planning for the West Haven community. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker that we have is Lucy Kostrua. Lucy, if you're on the line, now's your time to speak. Okay, if Lucy is not there, I do have 3 comments that I do need to read into the record. Dear HCOG, one of the items on your agenda for 8/19/21 is item 8B concerning the Trinidad Rancheria. Within the proposal by the Trinidad Rancheria are plans to widen West Haven Drive. There has been no discussion with many residents along West Haven Drive whose properties, viewscapes, and lifestyles would be dramatically changed. I have lived in Trinidad since 1976 and near the north end of West Haven for over 40 years. I have no wish to see the road widened by 15 to 30 feet, destroying trees, houses, yards, and lifestyles. I doubt you would find many people living on West Haven Drive who would want to see such a change. We aren't asking for the road to be widened. I am asking that you reject any proposal to widen the road. Please consider what makes Trinidad and West Haven special. It is the scenic beauty. We do not need a wider road encouraging more development with faster traffic. We do not need more businesses drawing more visitors and future residents to a precious area whose very character will be lost with the impact of more people crowding the streets, beaches, and trails and the development that follows. Please do not allow so many people along West Haven Drive who love the area just the way it is to involuntarily have growth pushed upon us. Please hear our voice. Audie Voss. The next public comment is, I live on 700 North West Haven Drive, very close to where I have heard what the proposed interchange could be. In spite of this, I have never been contacted by the tribe regarding their intentions to possibly put a freeway entrance or exit near my home, which would require them to widen the road in front of my property. My property is zoned coastal agriculture. A freeway interchange would greatly affect our neighborhood. I strongly urge a vote against this freeway interchange and road widening project submitted by Lori Jean Keating. Third comment, as someone who lives on West Haven Drive and has a narrow front yard, I've been alarmed by reports that widening the road seems to be part of the proposed interchange to connect the Shirey Heights Casino with the freeway. I don't see the sense of that, and I wonder if anyone does. I doubt that the Rancheria needs or even wants the entire length of West Haven Drive widened, so what agency is responsible for this crazy plan? The negative impacts to the 40 or 50 residents along the road are obvious, and I can see no benefit. What is the benefit to inviting more faster traffic along what is now a country road? It seems like a classic example of an expensive boondoggle that no one really needs and could be avoided if someone besides out-of-town consultants were in charge. Please exert some authority and stop this plan before it goes further. Submitted by Martha Walden. And that is all that I have for public comment. It does look like we have one more hand raised.
Go ahead and admit them.
Number 1963, you can speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Chair Johnson, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Hostler Carmison. I am the Chief Executive Officer for Trinidad Rancheria, and this is my project. I've been working on this project since I went to work for the Rancheria in 2007. This is the tribe's highest priority project, and the tribe has been working on this project actually since the year 2000, so 21 plus years. We have been going through the Caltrans process for those 21 years, and we have done everything we can possibly do to ensure that we take into consideration all of the entire community. There's a lot of misconception about the project. The tribe itself does not wish to widen West Haven Drive. That is not our goal. The tribe's goal is ingress and egress to Trinidad Rancheria reservation land. When the highway bisected Trinidad Rancheria tribal lands, the tribe was never given ingress and egress to their own trust land. So Trinidad Rancheria's goal is to gain ingress and egress. Our desire would be for it to be extremely small, extremely simple, and just a road in and out of the reservation, but that we found is not possible. We have worked diligently with Caltrans as part of the PSR PDS and the design exception. In order to get to where we're at, we had to consider all design alternatives. What folks in West Haven are seeing are design alternatives that were talked about to evaluate potential improvements to the surrounding roads. So it is nothing Trinidad Rancheria wants to pay for, nothing we want to, force on anyone. We do want to connect tribal lands, and that could be as simple as a walking bridge on our own property. However, as Director Burke said earlier, it's premature to decide. We will be entering into the environmental phase, and we finally have been able to put an RFP out for our consultant so we can begin the work on the EIR. So I just want to calm everybody's fears. It is not Trinidad Rancheria that desires to take property or to widen West Haven Drive. It will be a process. It will be a CEQA process and a NEPA process, and we will be going through that process for several years, and we understand that. So we hear West Haven loud and clear, and, the tribe wants ingress and egress to their own land for safety reasons. We have folks crossing the highway with no safe crossing. Scenic Drive is failing. So there's a lot of other reasons that we need to construct some type of ingress and egress into Trinidad Rancheria. And in fact, Governor Newsom has apologized to Native American tribes. And I really appreciate the gentleman from 736 South West Haven Drive. There have been atrocities. There has been land stolen. And in fact, the tribe, when the highway went through, lost about 20 acres on the other side of the highway and never was able to gain any access to that land. So it's an environmental justice issue for Trinidad Rancheria. We want to work with everybody. We don't want this to scare people. I think people are very fearful, and there's a lot of accusations, none of which we feel are accurate. So if you have any other questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you.
We have one more speaker, Lucy.
Do I press star 6, Elaine?
Go ahead.
Star 9. 9. Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Star 6.
We could hear you before.
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Lucy.
Oh, great. Glad I got on. Thank you. And I want to take a brief moment to say hello to Gordon Johnson, a former wonderful mentor of mine. Lucy Kosteva here. I'm a former senior transportation engineer at Caltrans District 1, licensed civil engineer in California for the last 30 years. Speaking primarily today as a 43-year resident of West Haven. Here's what I know about the project. HCOG, you guys, your board, funded a 2009 design fair to provide early input to this project. It resulted in the clear direction of developing West Haven Drive as a, quote, slow road to provide multimodal transportation. It specified delineation changes only, striping changes, no structural section changes. This tax-funded direction was not relayed to the consultant author of the project study report. The majority of the viable alternatives include, quote, widen entirety of West Haven Drive. And I want to thank, I believe it was Leslie just spoke, that you do not intend to widen West Haven Drive. That's music to my ears. Widen the entirety of West Haven Drive is in the project study report. Majority of the viable alternatives. That's the complete opposite of slow road. A project of this magnitude is driven by its purpose and needs statement. The valid needs of the tribe were amazingly somehow expanded to include, quote, the community of West Haven. We show up in the purpose and needs statement. We are 3 miles south of tribal lands. This was done without any communication to us as a community. The project is going through Caltrans encroachment permit process, the QMAP. Hired consultants, just like Caltrans engineers, are required to follow the Project Development Procedures Manual, otherwise known as the Gold Book, to Caltrans engineers. It's our main Bible for how projects get developed. That policy appears to have been violated with respect to community involvement, Chapter 22, which dictates early identification of affected communities. Even though the community of West Haven was specifically called out in the purpose and need, we were overlooked as a rightful stakeholder. The tribe initially appeared unaware West Haven is even included in the project. Caltrans approved the PSR, but they only look at their own right-of-way, and that's understandable. The consultant author of the PSR is now paid and gone, out of the picture. We are unincorporated county, not represented by Trinidad. This leaves West Haven completely unrepresented with respect to this project, in spite of the fact we are, against our will, included in the written statement of project purpose, and the majority of alternatives have major impacts to our community. My request to this board today is that the board consider the degree to which this apparent error casts a shadow of doubt on the validity of those alternatives that include West Haven, and to also question your recent allocation of $750,000 of public tax money to determine the impacts of those alternatives through the PA and ED phase. Those alternatives that we're going to be spending public money on were developed on the shaky foundation of lacking the prescribed community involvement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I don't have any other public comment.
Okay, seeing there is no comment, this item was initially brought in with one staff report and split off in the agenda. It allowed us to have public comment on the tribal update plan. And at this time, we will move to item C, the renewing our communities chapter and updated maps. And I believe Executive Director Burks or Una was going to do that.
Una's right there. She's ready. Una, you're on mute.
Sorry. Hello, members of the board and PAC members and staff and friends. So before you today is a new chapter of the RTP update, which we are calling Renewing Our Communities, as well as 7 maps that have been updated. Not all the maps yet, but a good chunk of them. So the Renewing Our Communities chapter is serving the purpose of basically laying out the foundation of the things that we are really changing, emphasizing from the 2017 VROOM RTP update to this year's. And it is in line with what the state is doing in a lot of their transportation planning and funding, and many of the new federal regulations, as well as just industry and professions in general, and that is that there is a more concerted and explicit effort to find actions to work against the global climate crisis. And there's also renewed emphasis to acknowledge and find actions to increase equity in our infrastructure investments, including transportation and housing. And also there is renewed acknowledgement and research and findings that the way we've built our transportation system is pretty unsafe for many pedestrians and bicyclists and people who aren't able to aren't youngins who can walk really well everywhere. So research has found that there is what some people call an epidemic of fatalities and injuries, preventable fatalities and injuries, and that we can build our streets and communities better to reduce those injuries. So that's the backdrop that we want to basically basically renew and refresh the transportation system so that we have beneficial outcomes for all those things. And that's what the Renewing Our Communities chapter is poised to explain. And then we have the maps, and I wanted to make one note about the maps. I'm sorry I didn't have the foresight to put this in your draft resolution, but we did have from the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council one recommendation for updating a map, and that was the goods movement map recommended to show that the ownership of the airports. And then from the Technical Advisory Committee, the City of Arcata notified us that they had more recent bike facility information to give us. So with the if the board wanted in their resolution to always also note that if they wanted to accept the maps for public release, that we would update those first per the request of the two committee members. So that is what I would recommend, but we are at your disposal. So thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions for Una?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. This Gordon Johnson down in Rio Dell. Was pretty surprised, maybe even alarmed when I read through this draft. Could we turn to page 5 of the draft, race-based discrimination in U.S. transportation history? For generations, public bodies in this country have been complicit, wittingly or not, in oppression based on race. I guess my question is, is there documentation that HCOG or any of the HCOG members have been complicit in discrimination based on race?
No, that comment is not to infer that any serving members have what you said.
Well, why is it in there then?
That is the historical context and the discussion of how we have set up transportation planning in the last professional few generations, and that is based on not research I have read directly, but from other resources that themselves had cited, but I did not read the original research for sure.
Well, this is not Birmingham, Alabama. This is Rio Dell in Humboldt County. And if things have occurred, and they have, I'll grant you that. But I don't remember anything in my lifetime in Humboldt County. And I think that needs to be removed from the report. This is a Humboldt County document, not a United States or Birmingham, Alabama document.
We do want to acknowledge with those two, I mean, the previous discussion was a little bit of the context of the history we talk about, the Native American tribes losing their land and getting kind of their travel routes usurped. But I would need your direction. This was an element that was already approved by the board, but of course, you can make any changes at your discretion, of course.
Well, I was not on the board last December when this was approved. Had I been on the board, I certainly would have raised my concerns at that time.
Sure.
And I was ignorant of it. Going down to the last paragraph on page 5, recent examples in 2020 during COVID-19 pandemic, Black Lives Matter protests illustrate transportation policy that may be benign for privileged and white class, but precarious for Black, Indigenous people of color. Is that true of Humboldt County? Were the people that were protesting Black Lives Matter, were they protesting transportation issues?
I can't say that the people in Humboldt were directly protesting any of the projects, but they were to my limited knowledge, protesting having less resources and living in areas that had less transportation access, and things like the federal monies that come to us having, 80% go to roads traditionally or historically, and 20% going to public transportation, when African Americans tend to be lower income and tend to therefore ride public transportation more than having their own personal vehicles. Those are the kinds of protests, or I should say the kinds of things they were bringing up.
The document kind of paints us as a bunch of bigots. And I don't think that's who we are. I really have a problem with the document. It's unsatisfactory as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I don't want to put anything out that
to reflect.
I'm sorry.
It needs to reflect 100% Humboldt County. That's who we are. We're HCOG. Like I said before, we're not Birmingham, Alabama, back in 1964.
All right, this is board level discussion, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
And I would just add, I think that the purpose of some of this framing is to give the broader context. So, and also that it is very difficult to find Humboldt-based statistics or information, just like many of our issues, identifying performance standards, we don't have quite the same depth of resources to pull out, like you're saying, like maybe, where there's higher BIPOC populations, maybe those things are teased out a little more to give more specific examples. But as Una mentioned, just even in the item before, talking about how tribal lands were split by the highway going through, we have been making some effort to assemble local examples, a little with some difficulty, but that's not to say that nothing has happened here. When we received an equity training, and one of the things that they presented were some local statistics, including that people of color here are more disproportionately likely to be pulled over for traffic citations than white individuals. So I think there are things happening here, and sometimes our numbers can skew that, and because we don't have as large of a BIPOC population. But I think we do want to make sure that from my perspective, I'm happy to take direction from the board, but I think the purpose of us putting it in there was really that broader framing, and that these issues be acknowledged. And I think that it is also something that we have taken the lead from organizations like the California Transportation Commission, the American Planning Association. So it's not all original language that is in here, but some of that is coming from other equity statements that we've been researching.
Well, I would like to see some language concerning Humboldt County in it then, not the broad brush that we're guilty. And with regards to the tribe, back in the late 50s or early 60s, when Division of Highways at that time acquired the property from the tribe, they entered into a purchase contract. It wasn't one-sided. It's not like Division of Highways crammed something down the tribe's throat. And with a freeway, there is controlled access. Part of the purchase price is that you give up your right to access to your property. That's what freeways are all about, controlled access, so that we don't have a driveway every 100 feet where there's a change of property ownership. That's the difference between a freeway and an expressway. So I take exception to the previous presenter as being maybe not totally factual in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. And perhaps we can change some of this language to include earlier, change the previous paragraphs you referenced while still including the statement of commitment to fighting injustice and inequity, so that we're recognizing and while recognizing that the inequities did not originate in Humboldt County.
Well put. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
I have a comment.
Yes.
I don't know if you are just not seeing all the.
I can't always see everything in one fell swoop.
No problem. Yeah, I appreciate that this speaks about historical inequities throughout our country. I think it's pretty clear from the language used that it's talking about public bodies in this country that have been, whether they were or were not aware of it, part of this history. I know that I have certainly heard from people in this community to this day who don't feel comfortable taking the bus or don't feel comfortable biking because they're afraid that the color of their skin will impact their safety. So I think it's worth, and those issues have to be dealt with directly by the agencies that are responsible for maintaining roads or providing transit. And they are very seriously considered in that decision making. But I think it's, not a stretch to say that nationwide there have been issues past and present with treatment of people based on the color of their skin or their country of origin. So while I don't necessarily think we need to change, I personally don't think there's much about this that I disagree with. I mean, I can understand the concern that people might think we were saying that we were, intentionally behaving in a way that none of us would want to behave. So if there's language that can clarify that we're talking about, transportation policy in this country having led to historic inequities and we want to be part of changing that, then, I think clarifying language could be helpful. I do remember this coming before us in December. I was not at the meeting where this was approved, but I did see the board packet. And anyway, I don't have any recommendations to remove text, but I think additions of clarifying information could be helpful. And in the future, any information we can compile locally about this topic would be really valuable. Perhaps that's something that we can seek out a partnership with Humboldt State University students at the graduate level, something along those lines to assist with. That's I think fodder for learning and research. But I do think the way that it states that we're talking about public bodies in this country and not specifically our jurisdictions does make that, does address the concern about, like, are we saying this about us? Or are we just saying this in general? We're saying this in general. So I don't know if staff have recommendations about language that could make that more clear.
Any other comments or questions?
I have something I'd like to add.
Yes.
We kind of left the public comment a little bit ago, and I kind of want to go back to it. I didn't want to stop what Natalie's idea was. So, but I'd like to go backwards a step because we didn't get done with that. Shall I do that now, or you want to continue?
Let's finish this component and then we can give you a chance to.
Because they seem they're both together, so
Yeah, it was a agenda snafu.
Okay, so
this was does anybody have anything to speak to on the renewing our communities?
We do have a hand raised for public comment.
Okay.
It's phone number, last 4 digits, 5603.
Yes, this is Colin Fisk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So, as most of you know, I'm with the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities, and I wanted to speak out in favor of including strong language, recognizing historic and ongoing inequities in the transportation system. I think, it's extremely well documented at the national level, certainly, and many examples at the state and local level. I think it's highly relevant for HCOG because most of what HCOG does is sort of funnel state and federal dollars to local projects, and those state and federal dollars are exactly what we're talking about, both historically and currently, having disparate impacts on different populations. I also think, we don't really have to look outside of Humboldt County to find many of these impacts. Based on just an initial review of data, I have found that people of color in Humboldt County are currently more likely to be hit by cars, by drivers while walking or biking. I also think, there's a horrific history here in Humboldt County of white folks' treatment of the native tribes, which I would hope everyone is familiar with. And given the remoteness of this area, the transportation infrastructure and the construction and maintenance of it is inextricable, I think, from the treatment of Native peoples as this area was being developed by white people. I think there's another specific example that I just learned about recently, which is that when there was a historic Chinatown in Eureka, it was turned into more or less a sewer by the local government for the purpose of developing 4th Street. They blocked the outlet of sewage from the rest of the city, which ended up in Chinatown, which helped lead to the negative sentiment against Chinese and their later expulsion, Chinese Americans. And so I think there are plenty of examples locally if we look for them, and I really urge you not to water this down. These are just facts. This is what happened, and there are continuing impacts. There are continuing impacts of current policies and historical inequities, and it's important to recognize them and work to address them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
I haven't received any other public comment.
Okay. Councilmember West, would you like to speak to your item now?
Yes, I'm sorry, we kind of moved quickly from one to the other, and I wanted to ask Beth a question about going back to the information we received from West Haven community, and as also a problem from Trinidad community. Beth, I just want to know what the next steps. I mean, it seems like the Rancheria has stated there's more information coming out. There is still time to come back to this. Could you explain briefly what the next steps would be, so we know there's going to be more coming out and West Haven will be included?
Yeah, thank you for that actual opportunity to go over that. So right now, the tribe has published a request for proposals, and they are seeking a consultant, and you can find that on the tribe's website. It's quite, I was actually very impressed with the request for proposal. You'll see that part of the work product and the scope of work that they're requesting, it does involve coordination with the community of West Haven. It's going to be built into the project scope. So what will happen is they will do special studies. They will begin the CEQA process. Caltrans will be the lead agency for CEQA, but the tribe will be responsible for, engaging with the consultant who's preparing that document. So one thing that's going to happen that the tribe has offered is a presentation before the HCOG board, just to make sure we understand the CEQA timeline and the avenues for public participation and further details about which project, which of the multitude of alternatives that's been discussed is actually the preferred project at this point. And so really until they get their consultant on board, I think we're kind of in a pause in terms of, additional information. There's been that project study report, but that does not necessarily mean that those are the alternatives that will be looked at for CEQA. They could be different, they could be consolidated, they could, be some of the same alternatives. So really, I think the next step is consultant gets on board, they'll give the presentation to the HCOG board so we get more information about how it proceeds from there. But certainly the public has not missed their chance to participate. CEQA has not started yet. The first step in CEQA will be a notice of preparation, which is a public notice that goes out and everyone can give their comments then, and those comments will need to be addressed in the draft DIR, environmental impact report, that will be prepared. So still ample time. I will say that this is not an HCOG project, so when it comes to the board, it will be informational, and there's nothing for the board to approve in terms of the CEQA process. That will be Caltrans that approves the CEQA document. We would be an interested party, and certainly we can keep the board up to date about those documents. And if the board wished to give a formal comment, that's something we could consider. But it's not an HCOG document that that would be approved by a document that would be approved by HCOG.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments on either item?
Question about the item. Sorry, I've got a little distracted. Somebody of all our callers mentioned being on just being part of the process, having the West Side folks included in as a partner, as a formal partner. Is that an appropriate thing for this board to do, or is that Trinidad's venue, or is that their area to pick who they are partners with?
I think that the request would come from, really it would need to be to Caltrans, that they're basically an interested party. So they're sure, and I think the tribe will do this regardless, but they would be an interested party. So they're sure to get that notice of preparation directly. And so that would be one way they could be on the official record. From what I took from that, from an HCOG perspective, and what we can do is, make sure we have, that organization sort of official contact, because, not that we really do a whole lot of projects specific to West Haven, but even this RTP update, they can be getting updated about all of our plans and policies. And, I kind of took that as direction to, make sure that we have their information, and that we will reach out to them as we do the RTP update and any other future plans we may be putting together that affect the broader county.
Thank you. I was kind of wondering where those scopes of jurisdictions fell. I'm still always figuring that out. And I would also, if I could just make a comment on the other, I was really glad that Colin mentioned the number of people of color who are hit by cars and injured in pedestrian and bicyclist accidents, and the areas in which we see high numbers tend to be low-income areas. So those were all things that were going through my mind as we were talking about racial inequity and the importance of dealing with it from a transportation perspective. So I agree that I would keep the language. I don't know that I would need to change it, but I wouldn't be opposed to what Councilmember Arroyo suggested.
Okay. Any others? Or at that point, we would entertain a motion regarding both of these items in one. The motion is on the staff report. but with language addressing both the maps, if we want to include language to update the maps before they're submitted for public comment, and the same with the renewing our communities if we wanted to change the language in any of those items.
Chair Johnson, this is Gordon Johnson, a member from Rio Dale. I would recommend that or move that we table item 8C, the Regional Transportation Plan Update 2021, administrative drafts for renewing our communities and chapter and the updated maps. Until we can get better language that's more reflective of Humboldt County and our community and HCOG.
Is there a second? Seeing none there.
Motion dies.
I would think that that is not moving forward, but do we have a motion for adding language for the maps and or language for the renewing our communities?
I move that the PAC recommend that HCOG board approve the administrative drafts of the renewing of our communities chapter travel transportation element and subject maps for release as public drafts.
I second that. Mayor Jones.
Does that include the updated maps?
It had the maps in the wording.
I know, but I thought Chair Johnson asked for some language about updated maps, so I just wanted to make sure.
Oh, I was reading the staff's recommendation, so I guess I would ask staff, does that and subject maps, is that including the updated maps or old maps? I assumed it was the updated ones.
What I was looking for was specific language because the maps that you saw don't have the 2 requests we got from committee members to update it. So if you wanted us to go ahead with the maps you have seen to go public and wait for another iteration, or allow us sight unseen to make the corrections requested and release those for public comment. Does that make sense?
So if I would just like to keep the maps that we've seen, but I don't want to necessarily, so can I make it without taking the whole map part out? I'll just make the motion and not include maps in the motion.
Or as the motion stands, I would understand it to just release the maps that you have in your packet.
And what we might want to do, Susan, is that also add some language to add the 2 more maps that have been suggested by staff.
Okay. Suggested by staff. Then I will do that. Let me reread this. Sorry, I'm going back and forth on my computer. I'm not. So
you just need to add that. At the end of your motion, just add and accept maps as updated by staff, or the extra 2 maps that will be updated by staff.
Okay. Can I move as Jones suggested? Mayor Jones suggested. Do you catch that? Whoever's taken the minutes? That's what I'm saying.
Have it. Thank you.
And I would amend my second to include that as well.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call?
Yeah, Supervisor Bass,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon Johnson, Councilmember West,
Yes.
Councilmember Aurora,
Yes.
Miss Tatiana Allstrand,
Yes.
and Chair Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right. We are at the point where we would entertain a motion to reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations.
I'll make that motion, Supervisor Bass. Exactly what you said.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we get another roll call?
Yes. Supervisor Bass,
Yes.
Mayor Jones,
Yes.
Mayor Seaman,
Oops. Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon Johnson.
No.
Councilmember Johnson, this is on, well, let me just go ahead. Councilmember West,
Yes.
Councilmember Aurora,
Yes.
Ms. Tatiana Allstrand,
Yes.
Chair Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, at this point, we move into item 10, which is a discussion of resuming in-person meetings. And I believe this will be chaired by Executive Director Burks.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a little bummed we have to have this discussion again, actually. I know I got direction from the board that we would be resuming in-person meetings in September. One of the things we talked about during that discussion was that those of us who were vaccinated would not need to be masked at that meeting. And it seemed that that was influencing some decisions. So as we know, there is a indoor masking requirement throughout the county at this point. So if we resume in-person meetings in September, it would be, as things currently stand, that we would all, vaccinated or not, need to be masked. So I just wanted to confirm that the direction is the same, that if we want to resume in-person meetings in September or not. Currently, the executive order that's allowed for these virtual meetings is set to expire at the end of September. There are, going through the legislature, some Brown Act changes that may allow these types of meetings to be more common with or without a pandemic or emergency, or some changes that would suggest that as long as we were in an emergency situation, we could have these type of virtual meetings. But as of right now, those aren't adopted, and the governor has not changed when the executive order is set to expire. So as of now, we have the choice for September to be in person or to be virtual, and then perhaps we'll know more at the end of the month if that would be an option that would extend further than September. But again, just based on the direction I got last time and the changes in the COVID situation and county directives to be masked indoors, I just wanted to bring it back and make sure that the direction was either the same or give an opportunity to provide different direction.
Is there, as of this moment, we don't have any direction at all from the state or anything. So I know with AB 361, I believe it is, there is a move to at least, if needed, allow the boards to move to virtual meetings in the time of a declared emergency without having to wait for an executive order. But it would allow us the flexibility also, the way it's written, to continue. Once we get to that point that we're back in meetings, we will be able to stay in person until we decide to make that change. So does anybody have any comment, insight? experience with the, oh, yes, Councilmember West.
I think it's, I'm looking at everything that's going on. We're working with the high schools, the elementary schools on our youth group programs. Everything is being shut down and everything's going back to masking. I think we should be responsible to show that it's not time yet to be meeting as a group. I'd like to see us postpone this as long as the problem continues in Humboldt County. I think we need to postpone meeting in person. So,
I'd like to ask a question too, if that's okay.
Yes.
You know, I know, well, we were going to go back in and then that kind of took sideways turn. But I thought the city of Eureka was back inside. I was going to ask Mayor Seaman to tell us what you guys are doing, because you were, and are you still? And
I was actually just going to raise my hand and say, well, we have gone back to meeting on Zoom. So we met once. We met once with a mask. Then we went back to Zoom. As I understand it, next month we would be eligible to do hybrid meetings. We'll have all of the technology to do that. I don't know that we have the desire to do hybrid meetings yet, but I do know that we'll have a capacity to run them that way. So I was just going to let you know that technology will exist. We have not used it successfully yet, and I don't know that we have talked about going back as a council. Right now, we're just in Zoom mode. And I'll just get a thumbs up from Natalie if she agrees with that.
Okay, anybody else have anything to bring to the discussion on resuming or not in-person meetings?
Yes, this is Councilmember Atkins Salazar from Arcata, and I just would like to concur with what Councilmember West said. I think it's prudent to stay on Zoom while our numbers are so high.
Okay. I know that we in Fortuna have looked into going to a hybrid mode, but we have not gotten the infrastructure or anything along that line yet. We're not as far along as Eureka is, let's put it that way. So we are continuing with Zoom meetings at this point.
And the only reason I mentioned the technology is because it will be Eureka's chambers that you're using. So I'm assuming that technology will be usable by HCOG. I'm not sure if there's special people needed to run it.
Probably.
Yeah. We will be in touch when it's time, and we do resume meetings in Eureka's chambers. We're working with staff to figure that out, and we may need to provide some funding for some extra support if their staff has to be there to run it. But we'll work all of that out and make sure we're good to go when it is time to get back in the chambers.
Okay, anybody else before we? I think that you've got a sense of direction from this discussion.
Yes, we will send the agenda for next month will be a Zoom invite. So.
Okay. And at this point, we get to staff and PAC member reports, beginning with the executive director's report.
Yeah, thank you. So one thing I just wanted to mention was that we are going through the Regional Transportation Improvement Program process this year. I'm working with the TAC on that, and the schedule is to bring their recommendation to your board in November. The 2022 document is due to Caltrans by December 15th, which is just in advance of our board meeting. So we'll need to adopt that in November, which looking back, it looks like that's been the process of the board is to adopt them in November. And so again, working with the TAC, as we heard from project manager at Caltrans, Jeff Pimentel today, certainly, things are evolving quickly with the Highway 101 and Indianola project, and that will influence the amount of shares we have to program. We just aren't quite sure how much yet. So, just more to come on that. It is like kind of breaking news every day in my world about, the information on that. So we'll do our best to keep everyone informed and certainly advocate HCOG's position in the future in terms of any overages and, absorbing as little of that from our county shares as possible. So the other thing I wanted to mention is we do have a public meeting scheduled for the Regional Transportation Plan update. We've been doing pop-ups throughout the county, and on September 13th, we will be doing a public meeting via Zoom that we hope to kind of get, just broad participation. We're working on the presentation now. We will send the invite for that and a save the date to all of you so you know when that presentation is happening, but just to get it on everyone's radar. Also, I became aware of a Caltrans project, and this is called Clean California. I think this is really exciting and has some great potential for partnership with all of our member entities and potentially nonprofits as well. Statewide, there is $1.5 billion in this Clean California program going to address essentially litter and infrastructure enhancement and beautification, litter removal. And so there will be grant programs available for local governments that we can apply. There could be, it sounds like the guidelines have not been adopted. I'll be participating in meetings to develop the guidelines. The time frame's pretty short. The money would need to be spent by June 30th, 2023. Things like, beautification, monument signs, murals, we can never get enough murals in Eureka. So, there may be good partnerships there. I think of Project Eureka that's done some great work cleaning up, and there may be opportunity for them and in other communities as well. It's not limited to highway infrastructure, at least not the part reserved for locals. There's also a part that is reserved for Caltrans, and Caltrans will be bringing us project lists to consider and kind of whittle down and use their funding locally here for projects specific to the highway system. So more to come on this, but I wanted to put it on everybody's radar because I know we all have a lot of contacts that could really benefit. So I'll work on pushing this information out, but I think it's a great opportunity to, in all of our communities, look at some beautification efforts, and we'll do our best here at HCOG to be helpful with, applications and how that looks as we move forward. Then the last thing I wanted to mention is just that we did hire a new executive director, a new executive assistant, and her name is Linda Reynolds, and she's been brought on board. She is going to be eventually, clerking our meetings, and so you'll be hearing from her in the near future. And right now she's in training, so just welcome to her, and know when you see that name, Linda Reynolds, that it is an HCOG person, and that's our new executive assistant. So we're happy to have her on board, and we are now fully staffed with everybody, so that feels good, and we're working together well as a team. And that concludes my executive director's report.
Thank you. Some good things there, and circulating the RTP is one of them. So we look forward to that meeting. And now we come to Caltrans reports, especially the good news we've just received on the last chance grade closure timing.
Yeah, good news for sure. The long closures will be ending by August 30th. The process is going so well right now that it's looking like these 1 to 2 hour closures in September will be less likely, although still possible. Regarding the longer term solution, we recently narrowed down the proposed alternatives from 7 to 2. So there's alternative X, an engineered alternative that mitigates the landslide hazard along the alignment similar to the current highway, and then alternative F, the tunnel bypass. So we're looking to complete the environmental phase early in 2025 instead of 2026. There will be a public scoping meeting in November that's focused on 2 alternatives, and we'll kick off NEPA and CEQA. We'll begin drafting an environmental document next year for circulation, likely in 2023. And there are regular project updates put out on social media and the project website, of course, lastchancegrade.com. And as far as closures goes, there are current closures on State Route 299 and 36 due to wildfires, and Caltrans website or the Caltrans District 2 Facebook page have current up-to-date information on those closures. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there any PAC member that would like to submit a report or any comments for Ms. Allstrand?
I would, I have a question. I've been working a lot on, because the fires in 299-36 have been closed. Some of our businesses haven't been able to come up through 101 with the long trucks. I understand that at least one of our big companies, so they're starting to send their trucks across 199 and down Last Chance Grade. That is the preferred option because it's preferred to be no option at all. How damaging is that to the roads to have additional trucks, or are you noticing enough additional trucks that it makes a difference on there?
I can't speak to that, but I can certainly look into that and bring that information back.
I'd be really interested if you can get it. This has been a kind of obsession for the last week and a half, so thanks.
Yeah, it's definitely a big deal.
Chair, I have something.
Yes.
So HTA is currently doing a bus pass promotion for all systems, including Arcata Mad River Transit, for $50 a month. So it's a pretty significant savings. Just trying to get the word out about that. And I also just wanted to give a little bit of good news. As some people may be aware, HSU is temporarily hosting some students from Lassen Community College, approximately 100 of them. And we were also able to give them free month passes for transit. So that is just a nice thing to be able to do for folks who are fire evacuees so that they can get around in our community. So please tell people you know who use transit to check out our $50 promotional pass. And we're hoping to be able to continue to do that. And it's a great way to see, kind of how it works for someone to have one pass for all systems. Most of our systems are work symbiotically, but Arcata Mad River is still doing things a little differently. So it's nice to try out how it works just when we're all using the same pass.
All right, thank you. And that is good. I have an Orca card for Sound Transit that covers everything from the ferries and the water taxi to light rail to the buses. So it's nice to have one card. All right, any other PAC member updates or comments and questions, or we will be adjourning?
Actually.
Oh, I was going to mention that we are adjourning to closed session.
Yes. Okay, so those who are not part of the board, if you leave the meeting now, I don't think there's anything to report on when they return. Otherwise, I can put you in a waiting room. Okay, we will put Access Humboldt in the waiting room and then you guys can proceed.
So Debbie, I don't have ability to put anybody in the waiting room. So
I just made you the host, so you should be able to now.
Okay, so it'll be just you and Linda that need to go in there?
Yes, and Access Humboldt.
Okay.
Or just kick them out. Can you see
Yep, I'm going to put you in the waiting room now. Thank you.
Thank you.